G'day folks, ZiggyD here. Path of Exile crafting has never been better. It's gotten more and more interesting, and this league in particular, with the addition of 4 new influence types for bases, multiple new Exalted Orbs, and the Awakener Orb, crafting has just gotten super, super delicious. And this league for me, I've been crafting up a storm, and the vast majority of my wealth has been produced through crafting as well. But I get asked quite a lot, how do you actually kind of get into crafting? What's some ways into it? And there's people coming up with way more creative crafts than me, but maybe I can help you guys at least get started on how to go about crafting some cool items either for your build or to make some money in Path of Exile. So the first step is, of course, to determine what is the goal or purpose of the item that you want to craft. And if you're trying to craft for profit, then you're probably trying to pick something that's A, going to be easy to sell, and B, going to be profitable to sell, and that will be determined somewhat by the cost of the craft and the difficulty of landing a successful craft. Now, if you go to poe.ninja/challenge for such builds, you can take a look at some of what is the most popular things that are being played right now. And if you've been following along with Path of Exile, you're going to see a lot of summoners and things like that. Even Cyclone here is actually summoner builds this time around. So you might be looking, okay, maybe I'm going to try and craft something for a summoner build. So you might then take a look at, well, what is being played most? We're seeing necromancers. What are the top sort of necromancers using? What sort of items are they using? You can browse various profiles here and take a look at whether there's any sorts of specific rares that these builds are using. This one does not actually look like a summoner, I don't think. But we can go through various different characters. We can sort by skills over here on the left, so we can take a look at Ray's zombie builds, take a look at some zombie setups, and figure out what these people are using. So they're using strength stacking belts, for example, and this is something that I've crafted and sold as well myself. So we're looking, okay, maybe we can try and make something that fulfills these goals. I'm seeing a lot of strength stacking summoners, so I'm going to try and make good strength items. What sort of items do they want? Browse through many different profiles, and you can get the idea of what sort of items people are looking for. So that's an idea of crafting for profit. When it comes to crafting for profit, you want to craft stuff that people are actually going to be looking for. You could craft something amazing, but if it's really obscure and people don't know to look for it, then people are just not going to know it exists, and then it can be really hard to sell. I've crafted some really nice items in the past, but they've just been so obscure, no one has known to even look for them to try and buy them. But that's crafting for profit. What about if you're crafting for yourself? Well, then you're trying to determine what is the goal or purpose of your item. I'll lead with an example here. So for my next build, I'm going to play like a Stormcall build. I'm stealing off Fox Tactics, and I'm going to use Orb of Storms for clearing. So the goal and purpose of the item that I want to make is I want to make an item that is going to help my Orb of Storms clear better. So I'm looking to make something like a pseudo 5, 6, or maybe even a pseudo 7 link, say helmet. I know that helmets are a good base for that, potentially also gloves. So I might investigate those options. But the goal and purpose of my item is to make an item that I can socket Orb of Storms into that will increase its power. That's a simple goal statement, and that leads us in the direction of what we want to try and figure out to what we want to try and craft. Your goal might be to make a very defensive shield with lots of block, or it might be to make a high life chest armor, or it might be to make an exploding chest. It might be to make some tailwind boots or something like that. I want boots that make me go really fast. Tailwind move speeds. Okay, that's what I want for boots. So that's kind of like the goal and purpose. Your next step is to do your due diligence and make sure that before you actually get in this crafting to meet that purpose or goal, you want to first investigate whether there are any viable alternatives. So this can be both be rare items. You could search on PoE Trade to find if you can just buy something like that really easily. Maybe what you want is 1 chaos, in which case you can just buy it. Or you want to make sure you're not butting up against uniques that are potentially just as good. In my example, I might look through unique helmets. If I'm looking to craft a helmet to socket Orb of Storms into, what sort of helmets could I use instead? There's not many, but there is Tempest Binding, which is supported by Ice Bite and Innovate. That's actually not bad for using Orb of Storms in. So I have a potential viable alternative. How good is the item? How expensive is it? It's actually not too expensive. It's like 10 to 30C for a Tempest Binding. How good is it? Well, it's not as good as the helmet I could craft potentially, but it's still pretty good. So if you're looking, okay, I want this to be kind of budget, and I want something that's just guaranteed to be all right, in which case, if there's a viable alternative, you might just want to go for that instead of crafting in the first place. But let's say you go through, you determine there's either no viable alternative, or the thing you want to craft is way better than the viable alternatives. Then that's when you proceed with the next steps and figure out what you're going to be crafting and how you're going to be crafting it. The next thing to figure out is, do you have any specific restrictions? Because these are the things that really make crafting either very difficult or very expensive if you have a lot of restrictions. The less restrictions you have when crafting an item, the better. If your craft is just like, okay, I just need this one thing on the item, the rest of the stats can be garbage, then you've got a very easy craft. Something you could potentially do with alterations, or even just chaos spam, or maybe just a single fossil, or just a single essence. Those sorts of things are very easy. Like, for example, if I just wanted to craft a helmet with more elemental damage to socketed gems, that's 1 essence, guaranteed. So that's a very easy craft. If, however, you're like, I need my item to have high life, things get a little bit more difficult. If you're okay with a bit of life, potentially mastercraft, you're okay. The example of crafting boots, for example, move speed is often a requirement for most builds on boots. So you're saying, okay, I really need this item to either roll good move speed, or I need to be okay with 24 move speed from the crafting bench. Or I need to be okay with no move speed. If you're like a Whirling Blades build, you might be, sweet, I don't need move speed. The cost of crafting my Tailwind elusive boots is going to be much cheaper as a result. So try and determine what sort of restrictions you have. Do you need a specific base type? Is that base really expensive? Do you need a specific enchantment on a helmet, for example? Is that really expensive? These are things you want to consider before determining whether you're going to go and proceed with a craft or whether you're going to look for some other viable alternative. The next thing to do, and this is such an important tool in crafting, is research the affixes that you want to craft. So you determined you're going to craft something, you kind of know what you're looking for. Then it's time to start delving into the glory that is PoEDB. This website is fantastic. It has built-in fossil crafting tools as well as all of the affixes for the slot. So I'll link this in the description for you guys to find easily. But you go to the item type that you want. In my case, I'm looking at int helmets. So I load this sucker up. We can see here is the list of prefixes that can normally spawn on helmets, and here is the list of suffixes, so it's divided left and right for prefixes and suffixes. And then we can also see Shaper, Elder Influence, Crusader, Redeemer, Hunter, Warlord Influence, potential Delve affixes you can get, Incursion affixes, so these are temple drops, or Metamorph has been dropping lots of them as well. This is the sort of example of something you can't craft, but you could try and look for an item that's part of the way towards what you want to try and then craft after the fact. So that's always something that's worth considering when crafting too. Can I buy an item to finish off? Can I look for an item with unfinished affixes that I can then finish? On that note, I'll give you a quick little bonus tip here. I'm doing this live as a one-shot recording, so I'll just give you a tip here. If you're trying to look for items to potentially finish off, you might be able to do something like this. If you type in suffix here, you can say empty suffix modifiers and type in 1. And then you could be, say, looking at boots, and then you can put in the rest of your affixes. So it needs move speed, pseudo total move speed, 30%, 60 life, and total resistances, 60 resists. So now I'm looking for a pair of boots with 60 resists, life, move speed, and 1 empty suffix. I can search for that. All of a sudden I've found boots that potentially I could throw one of the influence exalts on. Like, for example, one of the hunter exalts and try and land Tailwind. So this is an example of trying to find something that's unfinished. Or in the example that I was just talking about of the temple modifiers, you could look for something with some of these temple affixes. Say you really wanted, you know, Fizz taken as lightning damage. You could search for that affix, and then you could look for open prefix to add life or something like that to find a cheap item to craft. Good way to find bargains on PoE Trade as well. And then this also includes the list of crafting bench options, and you can also scroll through your crafting bench in-game to see what you can do, as well as essences and Vile Orb implicit. So everything is here. Now, if you determine that fossils are going to be a really good way to proceed with your item, you can actually use PoEDB really powerfully to determine combinations of fossils that could be really good for you. So if you watch my bow crafting video, you may have seen that I was using things like metallic, corroded, and aberrant fossils comboed together to get certain things to happen on the item. The important thing to remember with fossils is that they can block modifiers. So a corroded fossil, for example, makes it so that no elemental modifiers can spawn. So for example, with my helmet, I might want to investigate whether fossil crafting might be a good way to go about landing on a Shaper base, innovate. Now in this case, it looks like we could get added lightning to spells as one of the affixes there, but innovate's tagged by, yeah, innovate's +1 down here. So if we actually go into the affix list, we can see innovate is tagged by the +1s as well. If I really want lightning, I could try and use metallic and a lightning fossil as well, which I cannot remember the name of. Wait, metallic is the lightning fossil. We could use metallic and the elemental fossil, prismatic, to try and help influence that further. Or we could even potentially block other affixes we don't want. So play around with these fossils. Look for different fossil combinations that either give you fossil affixes you want. So in this case, does this add a Delve affix? Yes, it does. It adds nearby enemies have reduced lightning resistance. On a lightning build, this could be a really good thing. So fossil crafting is potentially very good and is often used for helmets as a side effect. Now, the other thing, if this is a little bit overwhelming, because there's a lot of affixes here, and it is actually just really fun to explore through PoEDB and look for potential combinations. You can look at things like, say, there's a hunter mod that I really like here. If I could combo that with a shaper base, could I do something cool with an awakener orb to get interesting combinations? Could I use fossils, or could I use essences to add something really good? Could I use a fossil on an influenced base to get some sort of cool combination with a delve modifier and an influence modifier? Very fun to explore PoEDB. But if this is a little bit overwhelming and there's way too many things for you here, you can always just steal ideas off other people. So stealing ideas off other people is, again, go back to PoE Ninja and look at someone who's playing a build like what you want. I'm literally going to steal my next build off Fox Tactics because I kind of love his lightning builds. He always does cool lightning builds, and I want to play something like that. So I can look at, okay, what is the sort of helmet that he's using for a similar goal? Is he trying to achieve a similar goal to what I'm trying to achieve? Find builds that are similar to yours, see what sort of items they're using, steal their ideas. So in this case, I see, okay, we can see this is a Shaper helmet with Innovate, increased area of effect, and Socketed Gems deal more elemental damage. Now, if I hadn't have thought of that, I could be like, oh, Socketed Gems deal more elemental damage. That's interesting. I don't remember that. We could go ahead and take a look for that. And it just so happens that I believe that is an Essence mod. So we can see down here in the Essence list, Socketed Gems deal more elemental damage. We can find out what that is. That's from Essence of Horror. So I'm like, oh, okay. So all of a sudden, an Essence on a Shaper helmet is potentially a very good way to try and roll a pseudo 6 or 7 link. Now, the other thing after this step, you've determined maybe a set of modifiers that you would like to try and aim for, then is to strongly consider what are the different options you have to help influence your craft. So fossils are kind of like a step 1, because they can block modifiers. But what can you do after you've started attempting to craft your item? Or can you do to help further improve your item? Or let's say save a bad craft. So you might craft something that's almost what you want. Can you do something to try and retrieve that, try and save that? Being aware of these options in generals gives you a lot more options to be able to try and rescue a craft or make something really cool as you're going through the crafting process. So it pays really well just to be familiar with these. So these options include things like beasts. There are a few different beasts, like, for example, that add a prefix, remove a suffix, add a suffix, remove a prefix. This is a very, very powerful and important beast that you can use to, let's say you've got a really bad prefix and you need an open prefix to put life on that item, and you've got an open suffix. All of a sudden, if you know that you have this option available, you can go to the bestiary, you can check whether you have this, or you can buy one for like 10 chaos, and then you can remove one of those random prefixes, maybe having like a 1 in 3 shot or a 2 in 3 shot, or removing a bad prefix, add a suffix, could end up being something good that you want, or it at the very least frees up a prefix that you can then add life to. So I've rescued quite a few pairs of boots that I was crafting by being able to remove a prefix and then mastercraft move speed, for example. So know about what Einhar can give you, and especially the remove a prefix, remove a suffix crafts are very, very useful. Of course, there is bench crafting. What sort of things can you use to bench craft an item? If it's like nearly good enough to use, but not quite, you can always rescue an item by crafting life on the, how much life can you craft? You can check on the bench, or you can check in here to see how much life you could typically add to an item. Very good to be able to potentially save something by adding a life or a resist or something like that at the very basic level. That's like when you craft something kind of cheap, or you just need to finish off an item with a single affix. Often master crafting is a very good option. There is also some pretty good master crafts generally as well. Like I could add +1 socketed AoE gems and increased area of effect. That's actually a pretty good affix to add to an item, and that could well suit the purpose that I need. So if I end up with an open prefix, I could finish it off by adding something like this. The next step of metacrafts, the next step of those master crafting or bench crafting options are going a little bigger and looking at metacrafting options. So this is things like cannot roll attack modifiers, cannot roll caster modifiers, things like prefixes can't be changed, suffixes can't be changed. These can be very useful for bigger, more expensive crafts. Typically, if you're just starting out, you're not going to be going into these too much because they cost a couple exalts a pop to use. But things like prefixes can't be changed. Let's say you're crafting an item that has 2 insanely good, very valuable prefixes. Maybe you've used an Awakener orb to craft something like +1 gems and socketed spell, oh wait, like enemies explode or something. I think those are both prefixes. but your suffixes are all really bad, and you have one open suffix slot. You can craft on prefixes can't be changed, scour the item, which gets rid of all of the suffixes, but the prefixes are left intact. So you rescue your good modifiers, and then you can proceed from there. You could multi-mod, that's another example, being able to mastercraft 3 affixes onto an item, with one of them being the multi-modifier craft. So maybe 2 good mastercrafts would finish off your item. If you have 3 open affixes, then you could use that. Or you could do things like just Exalt Slam it the rest of the way, you know. So being aware of these various different options is super important. And the biggest ones to remember are those bestiary, remove a prefix, remove a suffix, add a suffix, prefix, yada yada. The basic bench crafting options and the meta crafting options as well for bigger items that you can look into as well. And then with this league, we have now Awakener Orbs that you can use to take 2 items and smush them together, capturing 1 really good affix from both items. I went into that for my chest crafting video I uploaded recently, if you want to see an example of doing a big craft with an Awakener Orb. And Conqueror Orbs, like I mentioned an example of earlier, being able to Exalt Slam a guaranteed affix from this list. So I could look through and say, is there something I really like? I mean, Power Charge on Kill would be great, maybe. Or maybe I would want something like Fizz taken as cold. Or maybe I would want some sort of an Unleash setup for my main skills here. Well, a Redeemer Exalt, if I have an open prefix, has there's only a few different affixes here. This Unleash one is a little bit rarer. By the way, this over here is the relative weighting of it. I can give you a little bit of an idea. So if I used a Redeemer Exalt on an open prefix item and all the rest of affixes were full, then I have a decent chance of landing one of these Fizz taken as colds, or somewhat of a chance of landing Power Charge on Kill or Unleash. So, but it's going to always roll one of those, as well as adding influence to the item if it's not already an influenced item. So these are things you could consider as well, because those new Conqueror Exalts are pretty powerful. So worth being aware of your options. And that's a lot of what these crafting is being aware of all the different options. You'll be more successful as a result of just being aware of these. Now, the final step, once you've determined what you wanted, you've decided that there's no viable alternatives, or you want to try and craft something better than the viable alternatives. You've figured out what your restrictions are. You've figured out exactly what you want to craft. You've taken a look at the affixes and things like that. You know exactly what you're going for. So I know that I'm going to be using essences on a Shaper helmet to try and roll a pseudo 5, 6, or 7 link helmet. The next step is to evaluate both the price of this craft, how much it's going to cost you in all likelihood, and the potential positive outcomes. So the cost per craft is the first thing to look at. So if I'm just going to be doing essences, how much are the essences that I need to use this? Are they 10C a pop? 10C a craft? Is that within my budget? How many crafts would it take to land this, do I think? And that kind of segues into the next part, which is determining whether there is one very specific positive outcome, in which case it might take a lot of essences to hit it. If I wanted to only get a 7 link, so Innovate, increased area of effect, Socketed Gem supported by increased elemental damage, then it might take me a lot of essences to hit that. However, if I'm happy with just hitting any one of those, Innovate and elemental damage, or increased area of effect and elemental damage, all of a sudden I have many positive outcomes. Maybe I'm just happy with any halfway decent item. Fossil crafting, for example, maybe I'm just throwing life and metallic fossils on a helmet. I'm pretty much happy as long as I get any halfway decent helmet, or a helmet with some life and nearby enemies have reduced lightning resistance. That sort of stuff makes an item much more achievable and much cheaper in the end if there's many different possible positive win scenarios. Like, how many win scenarios do you have? How hard are they going to be to achieve? Do you need a very, very, very good item, or do you just need something that's kind of all right? Then that's going to be an important part in evaluating your craft. And then after you've figured this stuff out, you really want to double check and not make this mistake. You want to make sure you actually go to trade and check whether you can just buy this item. Because if this is something that is dropping naturally, or is an easy outcome for something that people are doing to try and achieve something better. Let's say people are trying to craft a really insane item, and there's a lot of people trying to do this, and your item that you really want to craft is just a side effect of this process, then your item might be very cheap. In my case, if I want the essence, not many people are essence crafting Shaper helmets like this. So if I want the essence modifier with at least even Innovate, so this is like one of the easy outcomes, there's like 1 helmet for 25 Exalts on Path of Exile trade. That's ridiculous. So obviously I'm going to craft this myself because what's available here is really bad. Also, if I consider the fact that, oh, I already have a helmet with an enchant on it that I want, then, well, that means it's a sure thing that I want to craft my own helmet and not just buy one. But maybe you do this search, so try and search for items that are similar to or exactly what you want, and, well, find out whether they're 5 chaos before you go ahead and start crafting. All right, so that was a pretty rambly but hopefully helpful rundown on the process that I effectively go through to determine what I want to craft and how I go about crafting it and whether it's worth crafting in the first place. And you guys, I encourage you to get into crafting. You really don't need, dozens of exalts to start crafting. A lot of crafts can be done in under like 50 chaos or even cheaper, depending on, what you're actually going for. And if you go through this process, you might figure out that, hey, this is only something that costs me 2 chaos per attempt, or a couple alterations per attempt, and the potential outcomes here, there's many possible win scenarios for this. It's like, that's an easy sort of craft to get into. Fossil crafting is particularly great for beginners. Fossil crafting belts and helmets is great. Crafting jewels is pretty knowledge intensive, but easy to do. The cost per craft is rather low. These are things, essence crafting generally is pretty easy, because you only are just throwing an essence on an item. And then once you start to get a bit more money together, you can start delving into the fancier things, using more fossils together, using more expensive fossils, using Awakener Orbs, using Conqueror Exalts and things like that. Anyway, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments below. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.